The room was suffocating, not because of heat, but because of the weight of what was about to unfold. Cameras blinked like silent sentinels, their red lights recording every heartbeat, every shallow breath. Donald Trump Jr. sat rigid, his trademark smirk faltering as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez placed a small black USB drive on the mahogany table. The sound of plastic on wood echoed louder than a gavel strike. Reporters leaned forward, pens frozen midair. Staffers stopped scrolling their phones. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. "This isn't about politics anymore," AOC said, her voice calm but edged with steel. "It's about truth, and whether it still matters. What you're about to witness is a dramatization, but make no mistake, the emotions, the stakes, the questions it raises, those are as real as the halls of power themselves. In a world where privilege often shields the powerful, what happens when a single recording threatens to shatter generations of untouchable legacy?" The clock on the far wall of the congressional hearing room ticked toward 8:59 IMEM with an almost taunting precision, its second hand slicing the air like a metronome in a symphony of silence. The lights above had been adjusted to their harshest setting, bathing the room in an unforgiving white glare that made even the polished mahogany surfaces seem to sweat under the weight of what was about to unfold. Cameras perched on tripods blinked their red recording lights, their lenses fixed like unblinking eyes on the lone figure seated at the witness table. Donald Trump Jr. sat there with his signature air of inherited bravado, his navy suit tailored within an inch of perfection, the knot of his Trump-red tie precisely centered. Yet for all his practiced ease, a faint sheen of perspiration glistened just above his brow, betraying an inner tension he worked hard to mask. His lawyers flanked him like sentinels, their briefcases open, their hands twitching over notepads as though ready to intercept any stray word that might escape their client's lips. Every now and then, Trump Jr.'s fingers drummed an idle rhythm on the smooth tabletop, but the movement seemed less casual and more compulsive, the energy of a man rehearsing his lines in a play where the stakes had shifted without warning. The faint hum of the climate control system undercut the silence, punctuated only by the squeak of leather chairs as committee members shifted in their elevated seats. Overhead, brass light fixtures cast a glow so warm it almost felt mocking, as if the room itself was indifferent to the reputations that might be incinerated within its walls today. The scent was an old money cocktail. Lemon oil from the polished wood, stale coffee from staffer mugs, and the faint trace of expensive cologne clinging to tailored suits. At the back of the chamber, the press gallery was a restless sea of notepads, cameras, and whispers. Veteran reporters leaned forward with the quiet intensity of hunters, pens poised above paper, eyes darting between the chairman's gavel and the witness table, like they could sense a headline hovering just out of reach. A young journalist from a digital outlet murmured into her phone's microphone, "This is supposed to be routine. Ethics hearings rarely move markets, but something feels different." Her words hung in the air like a premonition. Then came the sound that wasn't a sound at all, but an absence. An inhaled silence as every head in the room turned toward the double doors at the rear. They opened with a deliberate slowness, revealing Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez standing framed in the doorway, blazer as white and crisp as a freshly sharpened blade, hair swept back in a neat bun that exposed the sharp angles of her face. She carried no briefcase, no stack of papers, only a slim leather portfolio held with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing it contains more than enough. The room's temperature seemed to shift in that moment, though the thermostat remained locked at 68 degrees. A ripple passed through the press gallery. Cameras clicked in rapid succession, reporters whispering sharply, "Why is she here? She's not even on this committee." One congressional aide, clutching a tablet too tightly, muttered under his breath, this was supposed to be routine. Trump Jr. turned in his chair, his smirk broadening reflexively as if to armor himself against the approaching storm. "Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez," he drawled, his voice carrying just enough volume for the microphones to catch. "Here to make headlines again?" His lawyers shifted uneasily beside him. AOC didn't respond immediately. Her eyes locked on Trump Jr.'s with an intensity that seemed to compress the distance between them. Each step she took down the central aisle of the chamber landed with a subtle but perceptible weight, the soft click of her heels against the polished floor, audible over the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. She passed by rows of committee members, who straightened unconsciously as she approached, the subtle authority she carried pulling the entire room into her orbit. Reporters leaned forward, their whispers sharpening. "She has something. Look at the way she's walking. She's not here to grandstand." The young journalist whispered into her mic again, voice now tinged with anticipation. "Something's coming. I can feel it." As AOC reached her seat 3 chairs from the chairman, she placed her portfolio on the table with a quiet precision, her movements devoid of flourish, yet imbued with a sense of inevitability. Trump Jr.'s smirk faltered ever so slightly, the corner of his mouth twitching before settling back into its practiced curve. A bead of sweat traced a slow line from his temple to his jaw, catching the light like a tell in a high-stakes poker game. The chairman's gavel struck wood with a clean, sharp report. "This hearing of the House Ethics Committee will come to order." His voice carried the weight of authority, but even he couldn't suppress the slight tremor at its edge. He glanced at AOC briefly, his expression unreadable save for a flicker of something, curiosity or caution. The gallery hushed, as if a collective lung had been emptied. Somewhere in the back, a phone vibrated against a press table, its muted hum sounding indecently loud. Outside, the Washington air was thick with summer haze, but inside every molecule seemed charged, waiting for the first spark. AOC adjusted her microphone with deliberate care, her fingers steady. She didn't glance at Trump Jr., not yet. Instead, she took a measured sip from her water glass, her movements so calm it bordered on unnerving. When she finally spoke, her voice was low but carried effortlessly through the room. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe clarity serves us best today." Trump Jr. leaned back slightly, one hand toying with the knot of his tie. His lawyers leaned in, whispering furiously, but he waved them off with an almost imperceptible flick of his fingers. His eyes met AOC's again, and this time there was something there. Not fear, not yet, but the faintest suggestion of it. The cameras zoomed in tighter, their lenses capturing every micro-expression. Somewhere in the control room, a producer whispered, "Stay on her, she's about to drop something." And though no one could know it, yet, they were right. The storm had arrived, dressed in white. The air in the hearing room felt heavier now, as if the oxygen itself was straining under the weight of anticipation. The camera lights burned hotter, their lenses focused so tightly on the witness table that even the smallest twitch of a muscle seemed magnified tenfold on the monitors streaming live to millions. Donald Trump Jr. adjusted his tie with a practiced ease that was almost convincing, almost, but not quite. There was a tightness at the corners of his mouth, a shallow rhythm to his breathing that no amount of bravado could entirely mask. His eyes flicked toward the woman 3 seats from the chairman, the woman whose very presence had tilted the room's center of gravity the moment she walked in. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat poised, her back straight, her blazer as pristine as freshly fallen snow, hands resting lightly on a slim leather portfolio. Her gaze had not left Trump Jr. since she entered. It wasn't the kind of look that screamed or accused. No, it was colder, quieter, infinitely more dangerous. The gaze of someone who had already seen the shape of the truth and was merely waiting for the world to catch up. Trump Jr. smirked, the expression sliding into place like a shield. "Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez," he said, his tone dripping with faux amusement. "Here to make headlines again? You do love your viral moments, don't you?" His voice was just loud enough to carry across the room, calculated to sound casual for the cameras while simultaneously dismissive. A few Republican committee members exchanged faint smiles, the kind that didn't quite reach their eyes. But AOC didn't flinch, didn't blink. Her reply was calm, surgical, and just sharp enough to draw blood. "I'm here for the truth," she said, her voice carrying without effort. "Headlines are your family's specialty." The words hung in the room like a blade, suspended midair, and for the briefest of moments, even the scribbling of reporters' pens faltered. Trump Jr.'s smirk tightened, his jaw shifting almost imperceptibly, as if he were grinding down a response before it could escape. The chairman cleared his throat, bringing the proceedings to order. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez, you have the floor for your allotted time." AOC inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement, her movements controlled, deliberate. She opened her portfolio with the kind of care one might take in sealing a classified file, revealing neatly organized documents and a sleek tablet glowing faintly with highlighted notes. "Mr. Trump," she began, her tone neutral but layered with a subtle undercurrent of steel. "On September 12th of this year, you testified under oath before federal investigators regarding your knowledge of financial discussions between Trump Organization executives and representatives of Vector Holdings. You stated, and I quote, 'I had no direct knowledge of any such discussions between January and June.' Is that correct?" Trump Jr. leaned back slightly in his chair, crossing one leg over the other in a gesture meant to convey ease, though the slight bounce of his foot betrayed a nervous energy. "That's what I said," he replied, the smirk tugging again at the corner of his lips. "And I stand by it." AOC's eyes didn't waver. She tapped her tablet once, bringing up a timeline projected onto the large screen behind her. The display detailed a sequence of meetings, emails, and financial transfers involving Vector Holdings, all arranged with almost obsessive precision. The room collectively leaned forward as the connections began to take shape. "For the committee's clarity," AOC continued, her voice measured, "Vector Holdings is a shell corporation with documented ties to Meridian Project, an offshore energy development venture currently under investigation for possible violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Between January and June, multiple payments were authorized to accounts linked to Meridian via intermediaries in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands." She turned slightly in her chair, her eyes locking once again on Trump. "Are you aware of these transactions?" Trump Jr. shifted, his fingers now tapping out a silent rhythm against his knee. "As I've said repeatedly, I wasn't involved in the day-to-day financial decisions of the organization. Delegation happens in any large enterprise." One of his attorneys leaned in, whispering something rapid and low, but he waved the man off with a flick of irritation. AOC's expression remained unchanged, her tone unhurried as she pressed further. "And yet your signature appears on authorization forms for 3 separate transfers, totaling $8.4 million during that period. Do you deny signing these?" A murmur rippled through the press gallery. Cameras zoomed tighter on Trump Jr.'s face, capturing the faint tightening of his jawline, the sudden stillness of his tapping foot. "I don't deny my signature," he said finally, the words clipped, defensive. "But authorization doesn't mean I had detailed knowledge of the underlying transactions. I trusted my team to handle the specifics." AOC nodded slightly, as though expecting that very answer. She tapped her tablet again, and another slide appeared, a series of emails exchanged between Trump Jr. and senior executives, the subject lines referencing Meridian Cyprus routing and Anton's timeline. The highlighted excerpts glowed on screen like damning neon signs. "Your emails suggest a more hands-on involvement than you're claiming here," AOC said, her voice calm but carrying a subtle edge that made the words cut deeper. "Particularly this one, dated March 16th. Dad says to prioritize Meridian's offshore assets and coordinate with Anton to avoid Treasury scrutiny." "Do you recall sending that, Mr. Trump?" Trump Jr. hesitated, his mouth opening slightly before snapping shut again. The smirk was gone now, replaced by a look that hovered somewhere between irritation and unease. "I don't recall that exact email," he said finally. "It could have been drafted by a staffer and sent under my account. That happens." AOC's gaze didn't falter. "Convenient," she murmured, the single word almost lost beneath the steady hum of the cameras. But it wasn't lost. Reporters scribbled furiously, their expressions alive with the recognition that they were witnessing something more than a routine ethics hearing. Somewhere near the back of the room, a young journalist whispered into her phone, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "This isn't just political theater. She's cornering him, one thread at a time." And indeed, as AOC sat back slightly, her eyes still locked on Trump Jr.'s, it felt less like a conversation and more like a predator circling, waiting for the precise moment to strike. The air inside the hearing room had thickened to the point where every breath felt like an act of defiance against the suffocating tension. Even the faint hum of the overhead lights seemed louder, like the static before a storm's first strike. Reporters in the press gallery held their pens mid-air, their eyes darting between Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Donald Trump Jr., knowing instinctively that something seismic was about to happen. Trump Jr. sat rigid now, the casual arrogance he'd worn like armor earlier beginning to show cracks, so fine only the most seasoned observers could see them. The smirk had become a tight line, his jaw clenched hard enough that the muscle twitched near his temple. His fingers drummed once against the polished wood of the witness table before falling still, curling slightly as if gripping for control. He didn't yet know what was coming, but his body sensed it in the same way animals sense an earthquake before it strikes. AOC had remained utterly composed throughout, her voice calm, her questions cutting clean and deliberate, each one a scalpel peeling back the layers of obfuscation Trump Jr. and his legal team had carefully constructed over years. But now there was a subtle shift in her posture as she reached toward her leather portfolio, a movement so fluid it seemed rehearsed. The cameras picked it up instantly, their lenses tightening like predators homing in on prey. Slowly, almost reverently, AOC withdrew a small black USB drive from the side pocket of her folder and set it down on the mahogany surface with a faint click that resonated like a gunshot in the hushed chamber. The sound wasn't loud, but it was enough. Heads turned, pens froze. A low murmur rippled through the audience, like the first gust of wind heralding a storm. The USB sat there innocuously, its matte finish catching the warm glow from the brass fixtures above, but its presence was anything but innocent. It was a silent threat, a black box promising revelation, and every pair of eyes in the room seemed to recognize its significance instantly. A senior journalist from the Washington Post leaned toward her colleague and whispered, "That's it. That's the kill shot." Trump Jr.'s eyes narrowed, his gaze fixed on the device as if it were a venomous snake, coiled and ready to strike. He shifted in his seat, his right hand gripping the armrest of his chair tightly enough that his knuckles blanched white. For a man who had built a public persona on unflappable bravado, the subtle tremor in his fingers betrayed a reality he could no longer conceal. One of his lawyers leaned in urgently, whispering into his ear, but Trump Jr. didn't respond. His jaw worked soundlessly, his attention locked on the tiny object that now seemed to command the room. AOC's eyes met his across the table, calm and unblinking. Her voice, when it came, was steady, deliberate, and carried the weight of inevitability. "Mr. Trump," she said, the silence before her words making them hit like a gavel strike. "Before we proceed further, do you wish to amend your testimony?" The question was simple, almost polite, but the implications dripped with lethal precision. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a warning, a final opportunity to retreat before the onslaught began. The room fell into an unnatural stillness. a collective breath held hostage. Not a phone vibrated, not a chair squeaked. Even the climate control system seemed to hesitate, its usual hum muted, as if the very machinery understood the gravity of the moment. Trump Jr. didn't answer immediately. His eyes darted to the USB, then back to AOC, searching for any flicker of bluff in her expression. But there was nothing. No triumph, no malice. Just the steady gaze of a woman who knew precisely what she held in her hand and exactly what it meant. The smirk he had worn earlier was gone now, replaced by a hard line and eyes that gleamed with calculation edged in something dangerously close to fear. The camera zoomed tighter, capturing the sweat glistening along his hairline, the slight tremor of his right knee beneath the table, the subtle strain in his breathing. The director of the live feed whispered over comms, "Hold on him. Don't cut away. He's cracking." In the press gallery, a young reporter typed furiously on her tablet, her eyes wide as she mouthed the words to herself. USB, FBI recording. This is it. Her editor, watching from the newsroom, was already drafting headlines. Trump Jr.'s grip on the armrest tightened as he finally spoke, his voice lower, tighter than before. "I stand by my statements," he said, though the words lacked the easy confidence of earlier, landing heavy and brittle. His lawyers exchanged glances, one of them scribbling notes frantically, as though already preparing for damage control. AOC gave the faintest nod, her eyes never leaving his. "Very well." She tapped the portfolio gently, as if signaling the beginning of something neither reversible nor deniable. The USB sat silently between them, a black monolith of digital truth, small enough to fit in a pocket, yet heavy enough to fracture dynasties. The chairman, sensing the tension coiling tighter, cleared his throat and glanced at the time. "The committee will proceed," but even his voice carried an edge of anticipation, of unease. And just like that, the room seemed to realize, en masse, that the storm wasn't coming. It was here. The tension in the hearing room hung like a thick fog, but somewhere beneath the surface, the unspoken weight of two lives traveling opposite trajectories began to seep through every glance and gesture. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, seated with her blazer crisp and her eyes sharpened to surgical precision, carried with her the ghosts of nights spent counting tips behind a sticky bar counter in the Bronx, where the air reeked of sweat, spilled tequila, and the quiet despair of people who learned early that the system was not built for them. She had walked home under flickering streetlights, gripping her bag tight as sirens wailed in the distance, knowing even then that survival was not guaranteed, and justice was an idea that felt reserved for neighborhoods with manicured lawns and security gates. Her mother's hands, cracked and calloused from years of cleaning homes for families who never learned her name, had been her first lesson in perseverance, and her father's early death had been the first brutal education in what happens when a working-class family loses its single source of stability. By the time AOC poured her last drink as a bartender, her hands had memorized every crack in the bar top, but her mind was already mapping out escape routes. First through late-night study sessions, then through grassroots campaigns, where every door she knocked was a reminder of why she refused to accept the inevitability of inequity. Meanwhile, across decades and dimensions of privilege, Donald Trump Jr. had never known the crushing weight of rent due in 3 days or the gnawing fear of an empty refrigerator. He had grown up in towers of glass and steel, cradled by security details and chauffeured cars, where the concept of consequence existed only as an abstract discussion over boardroom tables his father dominated with bluster and sharp elbows. From childhood, he had learned to wear the Trump name like armor, stepping into boardrooms as a young adult already cloaked in the mythology of wealth and invulnerability. Mistakes were buffed out of existence by legal teams on retainer, scandals deflected by PR machines spinning faster than any scrutiny could stick. When college escapades threatened headlines, checks were written, and when questionable business dealings surfaced, silence was bought, like any other commodity. For Trump Jr., life had been a series of interconnected safety nets, each woven with generational wealth, powerful friends, and a media empire his family learned to manipulate with alarming ease. The boy who had once stood beside his father in boardrooms became the man who believed immunity was his birthright, the rules mere guidelines for others. In the hearing room, these two trajectories now collided in a space where only one could emerge intact. AOC's gaze held the quiet defiance of someone who had fought for every inch of ground beneath her feet. It was the same look she had carried when canvassing in neighborhoods where people told her, "You'll never win against the machine," and the same one that faced down political veterans who underestimated the fire she carried. Trump Jr., in contrast, sat surrounded by attorneys whose mere presence underscored how accustomed he was to insulation from consequence. His fingers tapped an uneven rhythm on the table's surface, a subconscious tell from a man who had never been forced to sweat under the glare of accountability, at least not like this. As the press gallery watched, some scribbling furiously, others holding cameras so still their arms ached, there was a dawning awareness that this wasn't just a clash between two individuals. It was the collision of two Americas. One that had been told since birth that the world would catch them no matter how far they fell, and one that had been told it would never be caught at all, so it had better learn to climb. The journalists caught the contrast in every frame, the immaculate tailoring of Trump Jr.'s suit against the deliberate simplicity of AOC's attire, the restless shifting of his eyes against her unwavering calm. One whispered, "This is more than a hearing. This is a reckoning." AOC's fingers brushed against her legal pad, annotated in her looping handwriting, each note a testament to weeks of midnight research sessions and early morning calls with whistleblowers who spoke in hushed tones over encrypted lines. Trump Jr.'s lawyers, on the other hand, flipped through glossy leather binders prepared by teams of paralegals instructed to shield their client from uncomfortable truths. She had once watched her mother scrub the floors of families who wore the same cologne Trump Jr. now carried into the hearing room, and she remembered thinking as a child that power smelled expensive. Today, the scent no longer intimidated her. It only reinforced her purpose. Trump Jr., for all his inherited confidence, could feel the shift too. This wasn't one of the cable news segments he was used to dominating with sound bites and derisive smirks. Here, in this room, under these lights, facing this woman, his usual armor felt thinner, the familiar sense of impunity dulled by the weight of her steady gaze. And though he would never admit it, something deep inside him recognized the danger of facing someone who had already fought far harder battles just to sit in this chair across from him. The seconds stretched, every glance, every breath a study in contrasts, two paths carved through wildly different terrains, converging in a room where history had a habit of taking notes. The camera zoomed tighter, as if trying to capture not just the faces, but the entire lives that had led these two adversaries to this single crucible. For the first time, Trump Jr.'s fingers stopped drumming. The tension in the hearing room crackled like static before a lightning strike. Every pair of eyes locked on the two figures sitting across from each other, as if the very air was waiting to ignite. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez leaned forward slightly, her fingers interlaced on the table before her, posture calm, yet radiating a quiet authority that dared anyone to underestimate her. "Baba Gusmam, Fasai." Her voice, when it came, was steady, but carried an undertone sharp enough to slice through the pretense thickening in the room. "Let's talk about your statement on September 12th, she began, her words deliberate, precise, each syllable striking like a gavel. The phrase alone sent a visible ripple through the gallery. Reporters instinctively straightening in their seats, pens poised mid-air. Donald Trump Jr. tilted his head, his signature smirk returning like a reflexive shield, the kind honed from years of deflecting uncomfortable truths with sarcasm and charm. He adjusted his cufflinks with a leisurely motion meant to convey control, but there was a slight tightness in his jaw that betrayed the effort it took to maintain the facade. "We're talking politics here, not criminality," he said, the words rolling out with practiced nonchalance, as though the mere suggestion of wrongdoing was laughable. Some of the Republican members on the committee chuckled softly, their amusement like faint static in the charged atmosphere. But AOC's expression didn't shift. Her gaze held steady, unflinching, as if she were looking straight through the veneer of bravado and into the machinery beneath. Her voice, calm as ever, carried across the chamber with a weight that silenced even the soft murmur of aides whispering in corners. Then, "You have nothing to fear from the facts." The statement landed like a hammer on glass, and, for a moment, the smirk on Trump Jr.'s face faltered. Not enough for the untrained eye to notice, but enough for the camera zoomed tightly on his expression to capture. A reporter in the gallery whispered, barely audible, "She's not here for theater. She's here to cut him open." Trump Jr. let out a soft chuckle, the sound forced, his fingers drumming once on the polished mahogany before stilling abruptly. "Congresswoman," he said, his tone now carrying a touch of derision, "you and I both know these proceedings are a circus for the cameras. My family has been a target since day one. You're just adding your performance to the pile." His lawyers exchanged brief, nervous glances, one of them tugging lightly at his sleeve in a subtle plea for restraint, but Trump Jr. ignored the gesture. AOC, unfazed, tapped her tablet with a single finger, and the screen behind her came alive with a document projection, the transcript of Trump Jr.'s previous testimony, the critical lines highlighted in a glaring yellow that seemed to pulse with accusation. "On September 12th, she repeated, her voice calm but edged with quiet fire, "you stated under oath, I had no direct knowledge of any communications between Trump Organization executives and foreign entities during the period in question. Is that still your testimony today, Mr. Trump?" Trump Jr. straightened his shoulders, affecting a casual confidence that was growing increasingly brittle. "Absolutely," he said, the words sharp, almost defiant. "That's my testimony because it's the truth. There were no such discussions that involved me." His eyes darted to the USB still resting on the table, where AOC had placed it earlier, then back to her face. "Interesting," AOC replied softly, the faintest trace of a knowing smile touching her lips. She tapped again, and a second document appeared. A financial statement from Vector Holdings, showing payments authorized by Trump Jr.'s signature. The numbers glared from the screen like damning witnesses. This document indicates multiple authorizations linked to Vector Holdings during the exact period in question, all bearing your electronic signature. Would you care to explain how such transactions occurred without your direct knowledge? Trump Jr.'s smirk slipped just slightly, his lips pressing into a thin line before he forced a laugh that sounded hollow in the stillness of the room. "It's called delegation, Congresswoman. Something you might not understand if you've never run a business of significant scale. Executives delegate authority all the time." His tone was condescending, calculated to elicit a reaction, but AOC didn't bite. She simply leaned back, her fingers steepled, her eyes never leaving his as she delivered her next line with the precision of a surgeon making the first incision. "Delegation does not absolve responsibility, Mr. Trump, especially when those delegations result in financial transactions routed through Cyprus and flagged by Treasury for potential laundering." The murmurs in the room swelled to a low roar as reporters exchanged incredulous glances. A senior journalist muttered under his breath, "She's got him boxed in already." Trump Jr.'s hand flexed against the armrest, his knuckles whitening as he forced his tone back into a semblance of calm. "With all due respect, Congresswoman, These are standard business practices, blown out of proportion by partisan attacks. There's no wrongdoing here. AOC didn't flinch. She reached for a manila folder, sliding out a copy of an internal email chain and holding it up for the cameras to catch. Then perhaps you can clarify this email from February 8th where you advised, and I quote, "Censure Anton's people keep meridian routing discreet. Treasury eyes are everywhere." Is that standard business practice as well, Mr. Trump? For a heartbeat, Trump Jr. froze, his pupils narrowing just slightly as his lawyers scribbled frantic notes. The smirk was gone now, replaced with a thin veneer of control stretched taut over something darker, panic. He opened his mouth, but no words came immediately. The silence that followed was suffocating, the weight of the room pressing in on him as the cameras captured every flicker of uncertainty. AOC's gaze was unrelenting, her voice cutting through the quiet like a scalpel. "We're not here for performances, Mr. Trump. We're here for answers, and the American people deserve nothing less." The statement landed like a final, devastating chord as the gallery erupted into a frenzy of note-taking and whispered commentary. The atmosphere electric, with the sense that the first cracks in Trump Jr.'s carefully constructed armor had begun to show. The hearing room had become a pressure cooker of expectation, each second stretching thin under the heat of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's relentless cadence. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. Every move was deliberate, every question designed like a step in a choreographed dance, meant to tighten the noose without her opponent realizing it was already around his neck. Her fingers tapped a quiet rhythm against her tablet as she brought up the next document, the projector humming to life as a spreadsheet materialized on the screen behind her. The numbers and dates glowed against the congressional seal like an indictment written in light. Her voice was calm, almost surgical, as she spoke. "Mr. Trump, I'd like to direct your attention to this financial disclosure filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Here we see an entry dated March 16th, labeled Executive Consultation Fee. Would you agree that this payment was authorized by you?" Trump Jr. leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose in a way that betrayed his growing irritation. He adjusted his cufflinks, a gesture so rehearsed it nearly covered the faint tremor in his fingers. "That's a routine payment," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand, his tone laced with condescension as if explaining to a child. "Consultation fees are part of standard operations in organizations of this size. I wouldn't expect someone without that experience to understand." The comment landed like a cheap shot, and a few sympathetic chuckles rippled from his allies on the committee, but the sound quickly died under AOC's unbroken stare. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. Her expression remained composed, her voice unwavering as she countered. "Routine payments rarely involve offshore subsidiaries and routing through jurisdictions known for banking secrecy, Mr. Trump. Are you suggesting this transaction is consistent with domestic corporate practice?" The press gallery erupted in furious scribbling and rapid keystrokes, the air electric with recognition of a moment worth broadcasting in endless loops. One young reporter whispered into her phone, her words barely audible but charged with urgency. "She's walking him straight into it. He doesn't even see it." Outside the chamber, hashtags began to trend. Hashtag Meridian Money Trail. Hashtag FBI Recording. Hashtag Trump Jr. stiffened, his smirk now a brittle mask. He let out a small, forced laugh, his eyes darting momentarily to the USB still resting ominously on the table. "Congresswoman, I don't control every financial detail. That's why organizations have CFOs and accountants. Delegation is not complicity." His lawyers nodded slightly, as if reassuring themselves that the explanation was solid enough to withstand scrutiny. But even they couldn't hide the faint unease in their eyes. AOC leaned forward just enough for the movement to feel intimate, predatory. "Delegation is a defense often invoked in situations where direct oversight would be inconvenient," she said, her words cutting clean and cold. "Yet here, we have a transaction routed through Vector Holdings, a shell corporation with ties to Meridian Project and documented meetings with foreign nationals currently under investigation for sanctions violations. Are you prepared to tell this committee, under oath, that you had no knowledge of these connections when authorizing this payment? Trump Jr.'s jaw tightened as he reached for the glass of water before him, his hand lingering a second too long on the rim as if steadying himself. He took a sip, the cameras capturing the slight quiver in his wrist, a moment so subtle it was instantly memed across social media as the tremor heard around the world. "That's correct," he said finally, his voice more measured now, though the strain beneath the words was palpable. "I had no knowledge of any foreign connections. I authorized what was presented as a routine fee." AOC's tablet chimed softly as she swiped to the next slide. A new document appeared on the screen, an internal memo from Trump Organization executives referencing Anton's compliance strategy and routing Meridian funds discreetly. The highlighted line read, "Ensure DT Jr. is briefed on Anton's timeline for Cyprus transfers." The room fell into a thick silence that seemed to swallow the faint hum of the climate control system. "Would you care to explain why your name appears in this context, Mr. Trump?" AOC asked, her tone calm but carrying the kind of edge that could cut steel. Trump Jr. shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting briefly to his attorneys who were now scribbling furiously on yellow legal pads. "I can't comment on every internal memo. My name gets included in all sorts of discussions that never cross my desk personally," he said, his words slightly faster now, the smoothness of his earlier delivery cracking like old paint under pressure. The press gallery was a frenzy of movement, cameras zooming, reporters whispering, live bloggers typing so quickly the sound was a low staccato like rain against glass. Outside the chamber, cable news banners flashed with "Breaking, AOC challenges Trump Jr. on Meridian memo," as clips from the hearing hit social media within seconds. AOC tilted her head slightly, her voice lowering just enough to force the room into an even deeper hush. "So you're suggesting your name is used without your knowledge in matters involving millions of dollars and potential sanctions violations? That is quite the assertion, Mr. Trump. Would you like to clarify for the record how often this occurs under your oversight?" Trump Jr. inhaled sharply, his lips pressing together as he glanced sideways at his lead counsel, who placed a hand gently on his arm in a silent signal to stop talking. But it was too late. The trap had been set, the perimeter tightened, and the cameras caught every flicker of realization in his eyes as he began to understand that the narrative he had walked in with was crumbling, one line of questioning at a time. The atmosphere in the chamber had shifted from tense to suffocating as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez leaned forward slightly, her fingers poised over the sleek tablet like a maestro preparing for the next devastating note in a symphony of truth. The room's stillness was broken only by the occasional click of a camera shutter, but even those were becoming less frequent, as photographers, seasoned in their profession, seemed unwilling to risk missing a single flicker of expression from the witness table. The screen behind AOC flickered to life once more, this time revealing a series of text messages, projected in sharp, unforgiving clarity, the highlighted lines glowing like a neon warning sign in the dark. Her voice carried no anger, no triumph, just the clinical precision of someone laying bare the anatomy of a lie. "Mr. Trump, let's review this exchange between yourself and your chief financial officer, dated March 4th. In this message you state, 'Dad says keep MB records on the secure server only. Delete emails after reading.' Is this your text?" Trump Jr.'s jaw shifted almost imperceptibly, his teeth pressing together as though bracing against an unseen impact. His fingers twitched once against the armrest before curling tightly around it. "That appears to be my text," he said finally, his tone tight, controlled, a rehearsed calm fighting to maintain its grip on a crumbling reality. "But you're taking it out of context. MB records could refer to any number of internal files. It doesn't prove anything improper. AOC didn't blink. Her eyes stayed fixed on his, unyielding, her voice smooth as a scalpel. To clarify for the committee, MB in this instance refers to Meridian Basin, correct? And the secure server you mention is the same off-site server used by Trump Organization for sensitive communications? Trump Jr.'s leg began to bounce beneath the table. A barely perceptible rhythm at first, but one that grew as the seconds stretched. The cameras caught it in their tight frames, the movement amplified on screens across the country as commentators whispered, "He's cracking." His lead attorney leaned in, whispering urgently into his ear, but Trump Jr. waved him off with a sharp flick of his wrist, his face now set in a tight mask of defiance. "I won't be lectured about server practices by someone whose own party," he started, his voice louder now, an attempt to reclaim the narrative. But AOC cut in before he could finish, her tone calm yet edged with steel. "This isn't about parties, Mr. Trump. This is about facts. And the fact is, these instructions suggest an intent to obscure records related to Meridian Basin. Would you agree that deleting emails after reading is not a standard archiving procedure?" The bounce in his leg quickened, his polished shoe tapping an erratic beat against the marble floor beneath the table. The sound, though faint, seemed to echo in the stillness of the room, drawing the eyes of even the most distracted committee members. A junior reporter in the gallery scribbled frantically, her phone already vibrating with messages from her editor. "Clip that leg movement. It's gold. Run with 'Tell of Fear.'" Trump Jr. took a deep breath, his fingers tightening again on the chair's armrest. "You're twisting benign practices into some conspiracy theory," he said, but there was a quiver at the edge of his voice, a betrayal of the smooth bravado he had arrived with. "Large organizations handle sensitive data with caution. That's all this is." AOC nodded slightly, her gaze never wavering as she brought up the next text exchange on the screen. This one was shorter but no less damning. "The Bureau is looking at Meridian connections. Make sure Anton's people use the encrypted channel from now on." Her voice was soft, almost gentle, as she read it aloud, but the impact hit the room like a gavel. "For the record, Mr. Trump, when you refer to the Bureau, you mean the FBI, correct? And Anton refers to Anton Vasilov of the Russian Sovereign Wealth Fund?" Trump Jr.'s eyes darted to his attorneys again, their faces pale, with a mixture of frustration and fear. One of them placed a hand discreetly on his arm, as if to steady him. His response came slower this time, each word pulled out like a tooth. "I may have been referring to general law enforcement agencies, and Anton is a common name. You're making leaps that aren't supported by evidence." But his leg continued its relentless bounce, faster now, the once subtle tremor becoming an undeniable signal that the cracks in his armor were widening. AOC's lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. Not one of triumph, but of recognition that the strategy was working. She was chipping away, piece by piece, exposing the soft underbelly of privilege long accustomed to impunity. Across social media, the clip of Trump Jr.'s tapping foot began to spread like wildfire, accompanied by captions like "the foot that gave it away" and "even his leg knows." On cable news, anchors leaned forward with the breathless intensity reserved for political earthquakes. Back in the chamber, AOC leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a near whisper that still carried to every corner of the room. "Mr. Trump, repeated efforts to steer communications onto encrypted channels after federal inquiries began suggest a consciousness of wrongdoing. Would you care to explain that, for the record?" Trump Jr.'s lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. The bounce of his leg became erratic, his knuckles white as his hand clamped the armrest like a lifeline. The silence that followed was deafening, the sound of a man realizing that his practiced lines were no longer enough, that the walls of protection he had relied on his entire life were beginning to collapse inward. The room seemed to constrict, the air thickening, as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tapped her tablet again, the soft chime preceding a new projection that flashed onto the oversized screen behind her. It was a transcript header marked in bold. Recorded conversation, February 8th, Matryoshka Restaurant, Moscow. The words alone caused a ripple in the gallery, reporters leaning forward so sharply it was as though they feared missing even a single syllable. Trump Jr.'s face stiffened, his smirk all but gone now, replaced by a wary alertness. His attorneys shuffled papers with a newfound urgency, eyes darting between their client and the congresswoman across the aisle. AOC's voice remained calm, almost soothing, but beneath that surface was the unmistakable edge of a predator closing in. "Mr. Trump," she began, her tone deliberate, "this recording was obtained legally through a subpoena to federal authorities. It captures a conversation between you and Anton Vazeev of the Russian Sovereign Wealth Fund. Allow me to quote directly from the transcript." She glanced briefly at the screen as the highlighted section illuminated in stark yellow. "Donald Trump Jr. Once we route it through Cyprus, Treasury won't know." The words seemed to hang in the air longer than they should have, like smoke refusing to dissipate. Trump Jr.'s lips parted as if to speak, but AOC continued without pause, her cadence unbroken, pressing the advantage. "Anton Vasev, your father will be pleased with the arrangement." At this, the tension in the room became palpable, even the faint hum of the overhead lights seeming to retreat into silence. AOC let the words settle, giving the weight of them room to grow in every mind present. "Do you recognize this conversation, Mr. Trump?" she asked, her voice steady, almost gentle, as if offering him a final lifeline. Trump Jr.'s jaw tensed visibly, his eyes narrowing as he shot a quick glance at his lead attorney, who was now whispering urgently, pen poised over a notepad. The tapping of his foot beneath the table returned, more pronounced this time, the rhythm erratic, like the pulse of someone cornered. "I question the authenticity of this recording," he said finally, his voice tight, defensive. "Anyone can splice audio these days. This could be deepfake technology, political theater." AOC didn't move, didn't blink. Her gaze was unwavering, her posture unshaken, as if she had anticipated the line of defense. "You can question," she said, her tone soft but laced with steel, "but the evidence answers." The phrase hit the chamber with the impact of a gavel. Reporters scrambled to jot it down, camera crews adjusting focus to capture every flicker of emotion crossing Trump Jr.'s face. Outside the hearing room, social media erupted, hashtags multiplying like wildfire. Hashtag Cyprus route, hashtag AOCV's Trump Judger, hashtag the Moscow dinner. News networks interrupted regular programming with the chyron, breaking, Trump Judger, Moscow recording revealed. Back inside, the atmosphere had shifted from tense to electric, every spectator aware they were watching a narrative unravel in real time. Trump Jr.'s leg was bouncing now with visible force, his fingers gripping the edge of the table as though it were the only solid thing in his world. His attorney leaned in again, voice low but frantic, the words not audible to the microphones yet clearly meant as a plea for caution. But the cameras didn't miss the flush creeping up Trump Jr.'s neck, the sheen of sweat now visible under the harsh lights. AOC leaned back slightly, her hands folded neatly on the table, as if the weight of her evidence could do the speaking for her. "For the record, Mr. Trump," she said, her voice calm enough to be unnerving, "this recording has been verified by multiple forensic audio experts as authentic, with no evidence of tampering. Would you like to revise your earlier statement about having no discussions with foreign nationals regarding Meridian Basin?" Trump Jr. hesitated, the pause stretching unbearably long. In the press gallery, someone whispered, "He's boxed in. She's got him dead to rights." But he finally shook his head, forcing a thin smile that looked more like a grimace. "I have nothing further to add," he said, but his voice cracked just slightly on the last word. It was enough. The cameras caught it, and the world saw it, the first real fracture in the carefully constructed image of untouchability. The transformation was subtle at first, but unmistakable to those watching closely. Donald Trump Jr., who had entered the hearing room radiating the smug confidence of a man accustomed to winning by sheer bravado, now sat visibly tense, his fingers gripping the armrest so tightly the leather groaned beneath them. His polished facade had begun to erode under Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's relentless precision, each carefully constructed answer chipping away at the armor he had worn into the room. His lead attorney leaned in for the fourth time in as many minutes, whispering rapidly into his ear with a hand partially shielding his mouth from the cameras. Trump Jr. nodded almost imperceptibly, his jaw clenching, his eyes darting to the screen, where yet another timeline of financial transactions now glowed, this one connecting the March 16th consultation fee to a series of encrypted messages sent between Trump Organization executives and Anton Vassilville in the weeks leading up to the Moscow dinner. The words, "routing, complete, Cyprus safe," flickered in yellow highlight, their stark simplicity more damning than any speech. AOC's voice remained unnervingly calm as she gestured toward the screen. "Mr. Trump, this pattern of communication and subsequent payments suggests deliberate coordination to obscure financial activities. Do you maintain that these were coincidental?" Trump Jr. inhaled sharply, forcing a laugh that came out brittle and unconvincing. "Coincidences happen, Congresswoman. Your narrative assumes intent where there may be none. Business is complicated." But even as he spoke, his right leg began to bounce beneath the table, the rhythmic tapping, now an audible metronome in the tense silence. A junior reporter in the gallery whispered to her colleague, her voice tight with excitement, "She's building a timeline. Each piece tighter. He's starting to feel it." Cameras zoomed closer, catching the sheen of sweat collecting at his hairline, the faint tremor in his hand as he reached for a glass of water. His attorney whispered again, this time more urgently, his hand now resting on Trump Jr.'s arm in a subtle attempt to anchor him. But Trump Jr.'s eyes stayed locked on AOC, the cocky smirk of the opening hour, now replaced by a taut, guarded stare. AOC didn't break eye contact. Intent is revealed not by individual actions, but by consistent patterns over time, she said, her tone razor-sharp yet controlled. And this pattern speaks volumes. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the furious typing of reporters capturing every word for headlines already forming in their minds. Trump Jr. shifted in his seat, exhaling slowly as if willing himself back into composure, but the room had already sensed it, the first unmistakable signs of a crack in the armor of inherited impunity. The projector hummed softly as a new graphic flared to life on the massive screen behind Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, its lines and arrows glowing like the arteries of a vast, secretive network. At the center, Vector Holdings pulsed in bold red, feeding streams of funds into a web that snaked through Cyprus offshore banks before disappearing into Russian accounts linked to state-controlled energy firms. The schematic was clean, simple, devastating. AOC's voice cut through the charged silence, low and deliberate. "This is the financial trail uncovered by forensic auditors. Vector Holdings initiates the transfers, Cyprus acts as the laundering conduit, and funds resurface in Russian investments tied to Meridian Basin. Mr. Trump, do you recognize this pattern?" All eyes turned to Trump Jr. His face glistened under the harsh lights, a thin sheen of sweat betraying the effort it took to maintain composure. He forced a chuckle, but the sound was hollow, brittle. "That's just business," he said, the smirk he attempted failing to reach his eyes. His right hand moved to adjust his tie, but the gesture stalled midway as his fingers trembled slightly. AOC's gaze remained locked on him, her expression unreadable but unrelenting. Business that has bypassed Treasury oversight, routed through known secrecy jurisdictions, and coincides with high-level meetings in Moscow. You expect the American people to believe this is coincidental. Trump Jr.'s laugh came sharper this time, defensive. It's global enterprises, money moves. It's complex, but legal. You're trying to make it sound nefarious because of my name. In the press gallery, a veteran journalist murmured to no one in particular, "He's sweating it. That map, it's the kill shot." Phones buzzed in reporters' laps as editors pushed for updates. Outside, social media was already on fire with screenshots of the money flow diagram, captioned, "Follow the money," and hashtag Cyprus connection. Inside, the only sound was Trump Jr.'s shallow breathing, as the walls of denial he'd long relied on pressed closer. The room felt like it had stopped breathing. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez leaned forward, her tone steady, her eyes cutting like a scalpel. "Mr. Trump, if there was nothing to hide, why instruct your CFO to delete emails after reading?" The question dropped into the chamber with the weight of a stone thrown into still water. Then came the silence, not accidental, not awkward, but intentional and deadly. 5 seconds passed. The camera zoomed tighter on Donald Trump Jr.'s face as he shifted in his seat, his fingers rising instinctively to adjust his tie, though it didn't need adjusting. The faint sound of his breath quickening was picked up by the sensitive microphones, each inhale slightly sharper than the last. His eyes darted toward his attorneys, but no one spoke. The pause stretched further, an eternity compressed into moments as reporters in the gallery scribbled furiously, one whispering, "She's doing it on purpose," making the air itself turn on him. AOC stayed silent, unflinching, letting the question settle like a predator circling its prey. Trump Jr.'s hand lingered at his collar, tugging lightly, as if the fabric had suddenly constricted around his throat. He inhaled deeply, trying to steady himself, but the cameras caught the subtle tremor in his fingers, the slight flare of his nostrils. When he finally spoke, his voice lacked its earlier bite. "We follow standard security protocols. There's no sinister motive here." But the words landed flat, too thin to cover the growing cracks. Outside, social media exploded with clips of his hesitation, hashtags multiplying, hashtag Trump sweats, hashtag delete after reading. In the room, the silence had done its work. It had pierced the protective veneer, and the world was watching him come apart. Outside the marble walls of the hearing room, chaos reigned in newsrooms across America. CNN's banner screamed in bold red letters, "Breaking, Trump Jr. cornered in congressional showdown." MSNBC followed with a looping clip of Donald Trump Jr. tugging at his tie, overlaid with the headline, "AOC's silence strikes hard." Even Fox News, usually a bastion of Trump defense, ran a more cautious headline, "High-stakes hearing, Trump Jr. faces fierce questioning." The feeds never stopped rolling, anchors speaking over each other as pundits dissected every twitch, every pause, every bead of sweat on the witness's brow. Social media had become a digital wildfire. Hashtag AOCVS Trump surged to the #1 global trend, with millions of posts analyzing the timeline, the money flow diagrams, and above all, the silence that had sucked the oxygen out of the hearing room. TikTok was flooded with slowed-down clips of Trump Jr.'s fingers trembling against his tie, set to ominous music, while Twitter exploded with memes labeling the USB drive as the little black box of doom. Back in the chamber, the crescendo was building. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez shifted slightly in her seat, her hand resting on the small black USB still lying innocuously on the polished mahogany table. The cameras caught the gesture, zooming in as if the world was holding its collective breath. Reporters in the gallery leaned forward, pens poised, one whispering to another, "She's about to drop the hammer." Trump Jr., his smirk long gone, stared at the device like it was a ticking bomb. The room had gone so quiet, that the faint hum of the air conditioning felt deafening. And then AOC's fingers closed gently around the USB, her calm expression never wavering as she prepared for the final strike that would decide everything. The air inside the hearing room seemed to vibrate as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez gave a slight nod to the clerk. The faint click of a mouse echoed like a starter pistol, and the speakers crackled to life with sterile audio that sent a ripple of tension through the crowd. The voice was unmistakable. Donald Trump, Jr., sounding less cocky and more conspiratorial, speaking with his father in a hushed tone. "Dad, the Meridian numbers are better than projected, but we need to keep everything clean. Cyprus routing is tight, but Treasury's eyes are everywhere." Donald Trump Sr.'s gravelly voice followed, calm yet charged with authority. "Good. Keep me posted, Don. No mistakes this time. You know what's at stake." The words landed like a hammer in the chamber. Reporters gasped audibly, pens flying across notepads, phones raised as flashes erupted in rapid succession. The low murmur of shock swelled into a storm of whispered commentary. Trump Jr. stiffened visibly, color draining from his face as his lawyers leaned in, whispering with frantic urgency. He gripped the table edge so hard his knuckles turned white, his breath shallow, eyes locked on the floor as if searching for an escape hatch. AOC remained perfectly still, her fingers steepled before her, her eyes unflinching as the room drowned in the weight of the revelation. The second recording continued for another 30 seconds, every syllable tightening the noose. By the time the audio stopped, the hearing room had descended into organized chaos. Flashbulbs popping, staffers murmuring, committee members exchanging sharp, uneasy glances. This wasn't just evidence. This was the moment that shattered the myth of untouchability, and everyone present knew they were witnessing history. For the first time since taking his seat, Donald Trump Jr. no longer looked like the heir to an empire. His shoulders sagged, the signature smirk erased, as though it had never existed. His eyes, once sharp with defiance, now darted aimlessly, glassy and uncertain. The murmur of the room seemed to grow louder, the collective tension thick enough to choke. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. Her words, calm and deliberate, sliced through the noise like a scalpel. "Mr. Trump, is it still your testimony under oath that your father knew nothing of these transactions?" The question landed with devastating weight, amplified by the stillness that followed. Trump Jr.'s lips parted, but no sound came at first. His lead attorney placed a hand on his arm, whispering something frantically, but the witness shook his head, his throat working as he struggled to find his voice. When he finally spoke, it was no longer the assured baritone of a man untouchable. It was soft, hoarse, almost broken. I need to clarify my previous statement," he said, his hands fidgeting on the tabletop as if searching for something solid to hold on to. "There were discussions. My father was informed." The gallery erupted in gasps and furious typing, camera shutters clicking like a firing squad. Reporters mouthed the words to each other. "He's admitting it." AOC remained perfectly composed, her gaze steady, her voice unwavering as she asked the follow-up that would echo across every screen in America. "So to be clear, Mr. Trump, you now admit under oath that your father was aware and involved in these matters?" Trump Jr. exhaled shakily, a man watching the walls of privilege that had protected him for decades collapse inward. "Yes," he whispered, the word barely audible but powerful enough to set the entire chamber ablaze. The sound of Donald Trump Jr.'s sigh cut through the suffocating silence like a crack in glass, long and uneven, the exhale of a man finally recognizing there was no way out. His shoulders slumped further, his hands limp on the mahogany table, as if the weight of his next words was too much to bear. Reporters leaned forward in their seats, pens frozen mid-air, the entire room balanced on the precipice of a single moment. His voice was no longer the sharp, rehearsed tone of a seasoned public figure, but the raw, unsteady confession of someone cornered. I'd like to revise my testimony, he said, the tremor in his words betraying the battle raging behind his eyes. The gallery erupted in frantic whispers, the sound of typing like rain against glass, camera flashes strobing, as if to immortalize the moment in real time. One reporter murmured into her mic, "This is it, he's breaking." AOC remained unmoving, her expression calm, almost solemn, as she let the silence stretch, giving Trump Jr. no lifeline, no chance to retreat. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. "During my interview with the FBI," he continued, his tone cracking like old wood, I gave false statements about Meridian, about my father's involvement. I lied." The words dropped like lead into the chamber. Audible gasps spread in waves across the room, some staffers covering their mouths in shock as others furiously relayed updates on their phones. AOC's gaze didn't falter as she spoke, her voice cutting with quiet finality. "To sue under oath today? You admit to lying to federal investigators?" Trump Jr. nodded, his eyes fixed on some invisible point on the table. "Yes," he whispered. Outside, social media detonated in real time. Hashtag Trump confession and hashtag AOCV's Trump, flooding every platform as news anchors interrupted broadcasts nationwide with the breaking headline, "Trump under Oath Oak." Inside the hearing room, history was being written in the hollow voice of a man watching his world unravel. The confession hadn't even finished echoing through the hearing room before it detonated across the world like a seismic shockwave. By the time Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez calmly gathered her notes and the chairman's gavel struck for recess, cable news had already shifted into a frenzy. CNN plastered her image across the screen with bold lettering, "Privilege doesn't exempt you from truth." MSNBC looped the moment where she placed her pen down and uttered those 7 words, her calm voice contrasting with the chaos unfolding around her. Even Fox News, reluctant but unable to ignore the gravity, ran the headline, "Trump jar, ADMITS lying under oath, AOC presses hard." Within hours, the phrase became a rallying cry. Twitter exploded with hashtags, hashtag truth over privilege, hashtag no one above the law. TikTok users remixed her words over pulsating beats, clips of her staring unflinchingly across the table at a crumbling Trump Jr. amassing millions of views. On Instagram, graphic designers turned her silhouette into posters, her quote scrawled across in bold, defiant typeface. In small towns and major cities alike, vendors worked overnight to print T-shirts, mugs, stickers, all bearing the same line, "Privilege doesn't exempt you from truth." Late-night comedians and political commentators replayed the clip so often it felt burned into America's collective consciousness. Even international outlets picked it up, with The Guardian calling her the voice of an accountability era, and Le Monde declaring "un verite implacable," an unflinching truth. But inside her congressional office, AOC sat quietly at her desk, unmoved by the headlines. She sipped from a plain glass of water, her expression thoughtful, her phone silenced despite the torrent of calls and messages pouring in. Outside her window, protesters held signs quoting her words as if they were scripture. A staffer peeked in, eyes wide with nervous excitement. "Congresswoman," he said softly, "you're trending worldwide. Your words, they're everywhere." She nodded once, her voice even. "The words matter, because the principle matters. This isn't about virality. It's about reminding people that no name, no wealth, no dynasty stands taller than truth." As the world outside cheered, mocked, and dissected every frame of that hearing, AOC understood something deeper. The real work was just beginning. The sun was setting over Washington, casting long shadows across the National Mall, but inside Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's office, the light was dim and steady. Papers were stacked neatly on her desk, a pen resting perfectly parallel to a yellow legal pad filled with fresh notes. Outside, the world was still roaring. Protesters with handmade signs chanted her words. Cable news anchors dissected her performance with breathless urgency. Social media was ablaze with memes, parodies, and tributes. Her calm face and unwavering stare transformed into icons overnight. Yet in this room, there was no celebration, no high fives or champagne corks popping. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioner and the soft scratch of a pen as she reviewed the next day's agenda. She didn't look at her phone, though it vibrated endlessly with calls from senators, journalists, and celebrities who suddenly wanted to align themselves with the woman who had brought a Trump to his knees. Instead, she let her mind drift not to the cameras or the headlines, but to a kitchen table in the Bronx years ago, where her mother sat after a long day cleaning homes, her hands raw and cracked from scrubbing floors for families who never learned her name. Her mother's voice, tired but resolute, whispered in her memory, "Justice isn't loud, Mija. It's steady. It doesn't shout to announce itself. It works in silence, like water wearing down stone." AOC exhaled softly, her fingers brushing the edge of a folder marked with tomorrow's committee schedule. The magnitude of what had happened earlier in the day hadn't yet settled in. To the world, this was a seismic political moment, the kind that would appear in history books. But to her, it was a continuation, a reminder of why she had stepped into this arena at all. It wasn't about sound bites or trending hashtags. It was about holding power accountable, no matter how untouchable it appeared. Through her office window, she could see reporters camped outside, their camera lights flickering like restless fireflies. One held up a poster someone had passed him from the crowd. On it, her silhouette was framed beneath the words she hadn't planned to say, but that had already taken on a life of their own. Privilege doesn't exempt you from truth. She closed her eyes briefly and thought of the young bartenders she used to work beside. The single mothers who came into the diner after a night shift, counting crumpled dollars to pay for their coffee. The kids in the Bronx whose laughter echoed down cracked sidewalks. They didn't need a hero. They needed someone to remind them that systems, even the broken ones, could still be forced to serve them. A knock at the door pulled her back. Her chief of staff peeked in, holding a tablet with yet another breaking news alert. "Congresswoman," he said quietly, "it's gone global. Even in Europe and South America, they're quoting you." She nodded, but didn't turn. "Tell them the work continues," she replied softly. Her mother's words echoed again. "Steady, mija. Steady." Across America, the ripple effect of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's quiet storm swept into every corner of the cultural landscape. In a small coffee shop in the Bronx, two older women sat hunched over their phones, watching a replay of the moment AOC uttered the words that now seemed etched into the nation's collective consciousness. Privilege doesn't exempt you from truth. One of them, a retired teacher, shook her head slowly and whispered, "Mira, she did it. She really did it." Nearby, a young barista paused mid-pour, her eyes glued to the tiny screen streaming the hearing highlights, her chest swelling with something she hadn't felt about politics in years: hope. Downtown Manhattan, the mood was different, but no less electric. Inside a gleaming glass tower, corporate lawyers gathered in hushed clusters around wall-mount TVs, their expensive suits failing to mask the tension in their voices as they debated the implications of Trump Jr.'s confession. Some dismissed it as political theater. Others spoke in low tones of a new precedent being set. But even there, in the heart of power and privilege, AOC's words clung to the walls like an unshakable echo. Across social media, her quote became more than a phrase. It became a movement. Hashtags multiplied. Hashtag AOC Impact. Hashtag New Era of Justice. Artists flooded Instagram with designs of her poised at the witness table, calm and defiant, rendered in bold colors like revolutionary posters. Merch sellers couldn't keep up with orders for t-shirts and mugs bearing her words. Late-night comedians opened their monologues with clips of Trump Jr.'s trembling hands and AOC's unflinching stare. Even high school students began sharing TikToks of themselves mouthing her quote over dramatic soundtracks, a generation finding a rallying cry in 7 simple words. But the most poignant scene unfolded far from cameras or newsrooms. In a small, dimly lit bedroom in the Bronx, a little Latina girl knelt on her bed, carefully smoothing out the edges of a poster she'd saved all her allowance to buy. It showed AOC, blazer crisp, eyes sharp with quiet determination, and below her, the words that had captivated a nation. Privilege doesn't exempt you from truth. The girl's fingers trembled slightly as she pressed the tape to the corners and stepped back to admire her work. Her mother watched from the doorway, eyes glistening with a mix of pride and gratitude, whispering softly in Spanish, "Miche, remember what she said, you can stand there too someday." The girl nodded, her reflection in the cracked mirror catching the faintest smile of determination as the poster fluttered gently in the evening breeze, sneaking through the window. In that moment, for one child in a world of inequities, justice didn't feel like an abstract ideal. It felt like a real, steady thing she could reach out and touch. The Department of Justice moved swiftly, announcing an expanded investigation into the Trump family's financial dealings, as media outlets flooded screens with breaking headlines. Behind closed doors in the Senate chamber, the usual partisan walls seemed to crumble as a Republican senator leaned toward his Democratic colleague, voice low but heavy with conviction. "This isn't about politics anymore," he murmured, his eyes fixed on the floor as if seeing the weight of history bearing down. "It's about the Republic." The words hung in the air like a warning and a plea, echoed in whispers across Washington's power corridors. While networks clamored for exclusives and pundits debated her legacy, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez quietly boarded a train back to the Bronx, her phone silenced, her mind fixed on the faces of her constituents who had entrusted her with their voices. At a crowded community center, she stood among them not as a headline but as a neighbor, listening to concerns about housing, healthcare, and jobs. When a young reporter managed to catch her outside and asked how it felt to be a national icon, she smiled faintly, her voice steady. "My job isn't to make news. It's to make justice happen." At a packed graduation ceremony, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood at the podium, her voice carrying a quiet strength that silenced the crowd. Truth doesn't care who you are. It doesn't bow to power or privilege, and that's its power. Applause erupted, but her gaze stayed steady, fixed on the sea of young faces, ready to shape the world. As the cameras panned upward, the Statue of Liberty loomed in the distance, her torch blazing against the twilight sky. A narrator's voice closed the chapter with haunting clarity. "When the powerful fear the truth, democracy breathes again." This isn't just about a confession. It's about a system convulsing as truth detonates like a hidden charge beneath its marble floors. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't just speak. She pulled the pin and tossed it into a room where silence has always been king. Justice doesn't scream. It creeps like a shadow, then roars when the walls finally split apart. And now it's not about them, it's about us. When the raw, unvarnished truth comes pounding at your door, will you open it or pray it passes by? What does accountability demand? Not from others, but from you. If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Alexandria Rising Stories, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Alexandria Rising Stories.